But I'm thinking fierce, wolf-like, bipedal. This is the Lon Chaney Jr. scenario. You've basically got a werewolf. Welcome to another episode of God and the Paranormal, a podcast exploring high strangeness from a biblical worldview. Thank you for joining us. I'm Suzanne, and John and I are here for another episode. We'll be looking at two topics today. First, we'll explore something that causes a lot of doubt for some believers, and with a solid biblical worldview, it really shouldn't, should it?
I don't think so. It is something that tripped me up as a young believer, though. The accusation that Old Testament events are just retellings of some ancient pagan accounts from long ago. And the topic isn't really paranormal per se, but it does touch on some supernatural aspects of ancient history, at least.
An example of this is the huge amount of ancient flood stories. It seems that almost every culture has some sort of flood legend with a group of people building a huge boat to survive.
Yeah, isn't that odd? The typical narrative has a deity that's seeking to destroy humankind by sending a great flood. And then a righteous or a heroic leader builds some kind of craft to save a small number of people. And you're right, almost every people group either has a written or an oral account of this same type of a flood scenario. It's actually easier to list the cultures who don't have a flood story,
Wow.
which is basically Japan and a few African countries.
Wow. Well, according to our friends at Wikipedia, the oldest flood story is in the high school history teacher's favorite assignment, the Epic of Gilgamesh from the Sumerians, 1800 BC.
Mm-hmm.
We have a man named Utnapishtim,
It's easy for you to say.
who is warned by the god Ea to build a boat and save himself, his family, and animals from a great flood sent by the gods.
Yeah, Sumerian. And Gilgamesh is one of the earliest pieces of literature, period, from what I've heard. I'm looking at a list of Native American flood stories here. Almost every tribe. Here's a Hopi legend, for example. Ancient people became sinful, and the Great Spirit sends a flood, and it actually is Spider Grandmother is the Great Spirit. And she seals a few good people into a giant hollow reed, which floats them to safety. So same basic storyline, isn't it? Similar stories from the Mayans, Incans, Aztecs, and in South America, and still more legends from China, Native Australians, every European country, including Siberia, from India, the Philippines, Indonesia, you name it. It's just universal.
So we can safely say flood epics are universal, like you just said.
Yeah, I think so. But here's the problem. Critics are quick to point out that most of these are probably much older than the Old Testament account of Noah's flood. And that was written by Moses, obviously, around, I think, probably 1300 BC. So Moses, who many critics say was just a mythical figure anyway, obviously plagiarized, didn't he? Or he combined a bunch of local legends into his own little Genesis flood account.
Well, that's the serious accusation anyway. That especially it's serious because Moses wrote most of the Old Testament.
Yeah, serious enough to confuse believers, I think. It confused me. And it causes people to dismiss the historicity of the Bible in general, I think.
So how would you convince a critic otherwise?
Well, first, just realize that the Hebrews and most other cultures used oral history traditions up until like the general time of Moses. He's the one who started writing things down. And until something is written down and preserved, it's almost impossible to put an actual date on when the account started or who started it.
Oh, you use the example of John F. Kennedy in one of your books.
Suppose a group of people were there on the grassy knoll where JFK was assassinated back in 1964. And let's say that night, one of the observers was interviewed for a news article and the account was published the next day. So supposedly 50 years later, a reporter doing a historical article interviews another of the witnesses that were there and creates a brand new modern documentary on the event.
Hmm.
And then someone compares the two documents, one old and one new, and says plagiarism. The new
Okay.
piece is obviously copied from the original. So do you kind of see the logic in that?
Yeah. So how would you convince a critic that Moses got it right and the other writers didn't?
Well, that's a whole other issue. For a lot of other apologetic reasons, I believe Moses' writing, as well as the rest of the Bible, were inspired by God. And I think we can make a good case for that to any critics. The point here, though, is we don't simply dismiss an account because it was recorded more recently.
There also seems to be an underlying assumption that all the legends, including Moses's account, were based on common events.
Yeah, and that's another instance in which worldview is crucial in interpreting
Yeah.
beliefs that we talk about. And I don't think that most critics accept that all cultures have a common history. That's more or less a biblical narrative or a biblical fact. Most critics are likely influenced by an evolutionary view of human
Yeah.
civilization in which isolated primitive people groups have been gradually developing over hundreds, thousands of years. We're hit with it constantly with images of cavemen and brutish Neanderthals or whatever.
Yeah, and the biblical worldview completely rejects that.
Totally. But I think even most believers are drawn into the evolutionary view nowadays. I know I was in college. I learned to compartmentalize ideas. On Sunday, I could accept Adam and Eve. Then on Monday, back to believing humans developed slowly from primitive savages into modern civilizations.
Yeah, the biblical worldview of human civilization is laughed at by the intelligentsia today.
And it's one of the foundation principles in understanding history, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
Scripture is clear that the earliest humans were completely human. Adam and Eve's children were already using technology, music, agriculture. They were living in complicated cities. And most
Yes.
important, they had a common culture at that time. They were all still together as one people group.
And not just after creation, we know that at Babel, the human population was still unified.
Hmm.
In fact, most of them would have been contemporaries with Noah and his children. Accounts of the flood were still fresh in the minds of those who were scattered and started the diversity of human cultures that we have today.
Yeah, and that's totally different from the modern evolutionary view of it. To think that Noah was actually there with a lot of the people because he lived hundreds of years. And it's not hard to see that over the centuries, the various people groups that had originally been together at Babel would probably embellish the stories, adapt them to their own traditions.
And so that a few centuries later, the flood narrative accounts would still be similar because they were derived from a shared historical event.
Yeah. We've been talking mainly about similar flood accounts, but the same situation goes for all the events from the creation to Babel.
And we see that in the similarities of creation legends. Almost every modern culture has a story about the original humans communing with a creator deity in a pristine garden setting, and then something goes wrong.
And something we'll discuss in depth in an upcoming episode, the sons of God and the daughters of men in Genesis 6. We find that same narrative in the first book of Enoch and a lot of other Mesopotamian writings.
And whatever the other versions say about a historical event, by faith we hold to the truth that when God saw fit to record it as scripture, he inspired the true, accurate account. How do critics explain these universal legends across so many different cultures?
Usually by just dismissing it as something like a primal human kind of archetype or something. We supposedly have a deep-seated need to explain how we got here and a way to explain why bad things happen to us. So flood stories, because most cultures probably experienced a major flood at some time in their historical memory, and devastating floods fit the bill for sure for an obvious judgment from a deity.
And there's also catastrophes that tend to hang around in those stories.
Yeah, when you've got a catastrophe, it just kind of sticks. But instead of the similarities in a story being something disturbing that detracts from our faith, so these similar accounts kind of give credence to the biblical accounts, don't they?
I think so. And to the biblical view of human civilizations. What are the chances that so many cultures, if they did develop in isolation, would have similar histories?
And I think this is one of the important components of a biblical worldview. We should be doing a better job of teaching the biblical view of human origins. It affects how we interpret so many things in scripture and in culture in general.
And maybe why God inspired Moses to write it all down. Okay, so it looks like it's time for an update on some earlier episodes. What's the latest on the big guy, aka Sasquatch, Yeti, Hairy Man, Yowie, Momo, Grassman, Skunk Ape, and Bigfoot, all the same animal?
Long list there.
Or
Yeah,
are
or
are they the same animal?
yeah, are they the same animal?
One
Oh,
podcast calls Bigfoot the gateway drug to the stranger cryptids.
I like that. And that is true. Most people kind of get into cryptids because they read something about Bigfoot and that just keeps the, avalanches into something ridiculous sometimes. But we better define that term again.
Yeah, a cryptid, literally a hidden animal, but specifically a legendary, yet to be officially documented species. So are Bigfoots real? And is that the official plural,
Yeah,
Bigfoots?
Bigfoots. It sounds awkward, but it has become a real subculture. I listen to podcasts and I listen to these people a lot. And it doesn't seem to be as much between real and unreal recently. Believe it or not, no pun intended. Most people believe that the big guy really does exist in some form.
Wow.
So many thousands of reliable reports. And we have to say, and this is becoming our motto, they're seeing something.
Yeah.
The question we hear nowadays is whether he's a physical flesh and blood animal or some kind of paranormal creature.
And even for those who consider them flesh and blood, they're still kind of lumped in with the paranormal, aren't they?
Yeah, to the chagrin of a lot of Bigfoot researchers today who claim it's simply an undiscovered species of primate.
And there are some heated discussions between the flesh and blood believers and the paranorms.
Oh, yeah, lots of accusations thrown
Hmm.
around. But this is a situation which I'm starting to think both may be true.
So some people may be seeing a flesh and blood creature, and some are seeing something paranormal.
I think that's possible. We had a neighbor down the road when I was a kid. She was a widow. Her husband had died earlier, left her alone. And she was obsessed with the fear of someone breaking into her house at night. She claimed she could hear people rattling doorknobs every night and walking around in her hallway and just
Oh.
picking on her windows. So some of the men in the community would get together, watch her house some nights, and they would stay there all night watching and didn't see anything. But the
Hmm.
point is, there really are bad people who would break into a house and hurt people. So her imagined events didn't negate that fact. In fact, it's not out of the question that evil entities that we've discussed so often could have actually been taking advantage of her fears and kind
Mm.
of pushing her along. And they were causing deception, fear, anxiety. That's their job description. That's what demonic entities do for a living. And they spread deception and confusion as long as it changes and breaks down the biblical worldview.
So there could be flesh and blood Sasquatches and paranormal apparitions of them together.
Well,
Or
yeah, I'm just saying that if these creatures are real flesh and blood animals, they've certainly done a good job of spreading their mystique around.
yeah,
Their elusiveness has kind of made them poster children for the mysterious.
it's remarkable, really. And when something reaches legendary creepiness, it's a good tool for fallen spirits. Like
I
the
think
screw
so.
tape
Yeah.
principle we've talked about says, when there's the expectation of something strange, demons can use it for full-blown deception.
And reminding listeners yet again, we shouldn't try to find demons behind every bush. Like other paranormal accounts, most are likely imagination, hoaxes, some natural explanation.
But there's usually the proportion of sightings that can't be explained.
And we wouldn't even be talking about the paranormal aspect of Bigfoot unless there weren't so many reports of the creatures doing things that physical flesh and blood creatures just can't do. But
Okay.
currently, those types of reports are becoming more numerous than those where observers simply see a hominid or a primate animal running around.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit. Bigfoot as a real flesh and blood creature. As a biologist, what do you think about that?
I generally tend to think that it's possible. We use examples of gorillas. Well, there were legends of them decades before we actually found them.
But it's been over a century with Bigfoot and
Yeah,
almost worldwide sightings, and shouldn't we have something by now?
yeah. And I admit that's a huge problem for flesh and blood Bigfoot. It seems we should have conclusive proof by now, at least.
And this is the argument that everyone is constantly bringing up, that
Hmm.
we should have a body or a captured animal.
Yeah, yeah. And out of the hundreds of thousands of modern day sightings, not much, you
Hmm.
know. And granted, I think there's a lot of blurry evidence out there, footprints. We've got inconclusive DNA where they find the DNA and it comes back to be what they would say mostly human, but not
Wow.
quite. Inconclusive photos, videos, vocalizations. We've got lots of recordings that people say can be attributed to some kind of unknown creature out there. And on top of everything, we've got reliable witnesses. So it always comes back to that. You've got people that say they see it, and there's no reason not to believe some of these people.
But from a scientific point of view, that's not enough
No,
data.
no, not from science. We need that real up close body, either alive or dead.
Shouldn't we have run across a dead body somewhere or a skeleton by now?
I've heard good arguments to the contrary. We have several thousand bear here in Arkansas, and I've never run across one,
That's
actually, not even a living one or a dead one. And I've spent a lot of time in the woods.
okay. So how many Bigfoot creatures do you think there are?
A lot of people calculate with the number of sightings and the need for a breeding population, like maybe tens of thousands in North America.
Wow. Yet they still have eluded capture for all of these years.
Well, all animals have specific characteristics that allow them to survive, obviously. Some biologists suggest that maybe Bigfoot's primary survival trait is the ability to be secretive and elusive in some way. And I don't
Hmm.
think most people really get the idea how wild Bigfoot habitats are. I mean, I've been there, I've grown up in it. In alleged habitats in Oklahoma and Arkansas alone, there are thousands of square miles of almost jungle-like forest. I've been in places it would be easy to miss a group of animals just a few meters away in some of these areas.
Okay. So, do you think Bigfoot is some type of North American ape or gorilla?
Several opinions on that too. On one extreme, some reports have them looking much like gorillas or orangutans. Jane Goodall thinks that Bigfoot is just an undocumented primate species. Others have them more like hairy humans or Neanderthal-like, some would say. Yeah, that was the belief when I was a child. The old timers would get together and talk about what they called hairy man, and they looked at it as just a human group of people who maybe 100, 200 years ago just started living in the woods. And, they had all kinds of reasons for explaining how they got taller and how they grew hair on their body
Hmm.
and things like that. But yeah, there were stories of them stealing chickens and raiding gardens and so on.
And that kind of decreases credibility, doesn't it? If it's a single species, can observers be that inconsistent in the descriptions?
And that's right. It would be easier to make the case for a single species, I think. But the reality is, we get color variations, different facial features, different body shapes, different behaviors, even maybe a dozen different general description types that people talk about.
So those reports are more of the flesh and blood animal type. What about the paranormal reports? How are they different?
They call this the woo group of people. It comes from
Woo.
the, I guess, woo or whatever. But that's the name we put on people who believe that Bigfoot is more of a paranormal, supernatural creature. And remember, we're discussing this because there are thousands of accounts now of these creatures doing things that would be atypical, or we'll just say it, impossible for a flesh and blood creature to do.
So not just a few anecdotal events.
No. And I'll bring up the ones that are common among sightings, the rules rather than the exceptions.
Okay.
First of all, some kind of mind control thing that's being
Right.
reported a lot. Witnesses report a spectrum of mental weirdness from simply a feeling of oneness with the creature to completely being paralyzed and getting some kind of mental download, like the creature is putting words into their head.
Well, I mean, I feel really close to my dog, but I don't know if it gives me I
You've
think
never,
she tries to read my mind, but I don't think she's successful.
but she's never put words in your head.
Yeah.
But it's more than that, more of a hypnotic, I'm your forest buddy kind of feeling.
Ugh,
But
hmm.
that's on the mild side. Experiencers claim to feel a vibration deep in their bones, they say, and sometimes it causes paralysis or it makes them pass out or it makes them so scared they run away.
Oh, that's called infrasound,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's what they're calling it. Some on the flesh and blood side of this, they think that it's a low frequency sound that has an effect on humans. We actually know that's true. The Russians did this back in the Cold War days. They would aim ultrasounds at embassies to drive people crazy and make them act weird.
Wow.
So it does work. And the proponents of this say that maybe that's Bigfoot's survival trait. That's how they avoid being captured, because if someone gets close to capturing them, you just zap them with a ultrasound beam and do what you want to do.
But some people also hear voices.
Yeah, not audible voices, and some do. So it's called samurai talk because some people
Yes.
have said that it sounds like two samurai fighters mumbling to each other. But other than that, it's more like you get like I said, the download of mental conversations that are actually telling you to do something in a way that you understand, and they're calling that mind speak.
And what do they tell you to do?
Well, usually something like, I'm your friend. I won't hurt you. Please leave me alone. Why can't we just get along? You need to take better care of the forest, stop polluting the earth, stop using atomic energy. So, reminiscent of what we heard from UFOs.
Yeah, or maybe only you can prevent forest fires.
Well, that would be Smokey the Bear.
Okay. But isn't it interesting that that's what some people claim that the UFOs, the ETs are also saying?
Yeah, kind of a red flag, isn't it?
Right.
I would say, as a rule, if something starts talking in my head, that's not a good thing, and I need to do something about it.
So what else could a para-Sasquatch do? Like a paranormal Sasquatch?
Well, on Star Trek, how the Romulan ships could turn on their cloaking device and just kind of fade out to invisible.
Okay,
Wait,
yeah,
you
we've
didn't watch
seen
Star
that.
Trek, did you? You were a
No,
Star
but
Wars.
I mean, we've seen that a lot in different shows, that's used
Yeah.
a lot.
Well, supposedly Bigfoot can do that too. So, according to, again, hundreds of reports from people, sometimes he just simply vanishes completely. And sometimes it's more like if you ever watch the movie Predator, how you get
Mm.
kind of that pixelization of something. Some people have described it that way.
Well, that would certainly help in eluding
Yeah,
Sasquatch
yeah, it would.
creatures.
He
Yeah,
he also can simply walk into a cliff face or drop through the ground.
weird.
Hmm.
And the obvious thing here is this isn't just another animal adaptation. No known Earth animals can do things like this.
No, when you see that, you're talking something that's beyond any animal on planet Earth, which is why, if these are accurate observations, we have to go to the unnatural or supernatural possibility, or that's what some people do anyway.
And what you said earlier still applies. Having paranormal accounts doesn't negate the possibility that there could also be a real flesh and blood species out there as well.
Yeah, and that makes Bigfoot, I think, different from ETs and some other things we talk
Okay,
about because, yeah, we could have a real flesh and blood Bigfoot, and we could have
I
mimics of
hope
that some
so.
way because demonic entities may be using something that's mysterious and threatening in some way to do any kind of deception on us. Okay, let's look at some locomotion oddities with Bigfoot. There are varying reports of a creature who walks quadrupedally on four legs, but we also have bipedally on two legs, or switching back and forth from two to four.
And we have animals that can do that, like apes and bears.
Yeah, but when they do it, it's kind of an awkward thing that's just
Hmm.
temporary most of the time, and it's not their usual locomotion. The variations, though, that's where it gets weird. One often observed locomotion is called the spider crawl. So imagine this, it's not just quadrupedal. The animal lays flat on the ground. This is Bigfoot, and he scurries like a spider at super speed.
I mean, that's really creepy.
I
That's
know that would be scary, first of all, if you saw it. And it's up there almost with the flying monkeys on the Wizard of Oz. But a lot of people report this. It's a common thing now.
okay.
Spider crawling. Okay. We also have reports that Bigfoot can float or glide. So, you know how when you watch someone or even an animal, their head kind of bobs up and down?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
that's just part of walking. Well, supposedly Bigfoot doesn't do this. Some people see him just kind of gliding like he's on a conveyor belt through really rough terrain at times. That's kind of
So
hard to understand.
kind of like a ghost.
Yeah, some people say that, and others describe it, like I said, of like Bigfoot sitting on or riding on something that's just taking it smoothly through.
Hmm.
Hard to describe, they say. It's just not the normal way that Earth things walk around.
Okay, so here's one of the strangest parts of all of it. Bigfoot and UFOs together.
Isn't it funny how paranormal things happen in clusters?
If that doesn't give a clue about the true nature of the paranormal, though.
I think it does. That's what Hynek means by high strangeness. Trying to explain a single paranormal phenomena is bad enough, but when you have multiple phenomena associated with each other in maybe time and space, that gives non-biblical researchers fits when they hear that.
Yeah.
And I think this is where deceptive entities show their hands. Strong evidence for supernatural orchestrated deception, I think.
And it occurs more than most people imagine. For
Mm-hmm.
example, when you look into the Mothman events in West Virginia, Mothman got most of the attention, but there were also alleged UFOs and
Yeah,
Hatman appearances at the
that's
exact
right.
same time.
Same time, same place. And it's
Mhm.
not uncommon to have UFO reports associated with Bigfoot sightings.
Right.
Thousands of those. Some have even reported seeing the creatures coming out of a UFO.
Crazy.
Mostly, though, Bigfoot is usually accompanied with glowing orbs of some sort. So when they say UFOs, they're talking about some kind of just a misty orb floating around at the same place Bigfoot is. And some people have said that they've seen Bigfoot holding orbs. So
Wow.
yeah, weird. And this seems to be something that would have to be on the paranormal spectrum, I would think.
Well, so how do secular paranormal investigators explain all of this?
Well, as you would expect, they're kind of left with just one conclusion, since it would be extremely unlikely for two totally unrelated rare phenomena to occur at the same time and place. They must be related in some way. And the
Okay.
most obvious relationship for a secular researcher is that ETs must be either bringing the Bigfoot or something.
Or ETs are capturing Bigfoot, or ETs are Bigfoot.
Yeah, all strange. Do I even need to go Star Wars on this, or should I mention Chewbacca?
Yes. Chewbacca was the original Bigfoot.
There you go.
Actually, I don't know if you know the story, but when they were filming the Star Wars theme, the planet of Endor in the Pacific Northwest, they were really worried that someone would think Chewbacca in the costume was a Bigfoot.
That
So
would be dangerous.
it just shows that how pervasive this Bigfoot thought is in our culture, even at that time. But I agree with Hynek. This is high strangeness. And with all these strange ideas, could the relationship be the media? Couldn't this just be the latest meme? Someone claims it, then you get a bunch of imaginative cryptids and copycats.
Yeah. Well, it's like all the other paranormal things we discuss. Yes, there are likely a lot of mistakes and hoaxes, but it always comes back to that preponderance of contextually different accounts
Yeah.
reported by reliable eyewitnesses, law enforcement, game wardens, pillars of the community. We've got multiple witnesses in some cases. Also, witnesses who have nothing to gain by making up a story,
Right.
and usually a lot to lose by this in their reputation. People who don't want to be the person who saw the paranormal Bigfoot.
Right. And there's so much fear too for some of these people who spent their lives in the woods and then now don't want to go into the woods anymore.
Yeah, it changes people. Okay, let's talk about a possible relative of Bigfoot that recently has been grabbing a lot of Bigfoot's limelight, Dogman. Yeah, Dogman isn't new. The Egyptians obviously had Anubis,
Um,
the kind of a dog-headed deity.
yeah, and wasn't it Herodotus who wrote about an island of dogman creatures, or maybe Pliny the Elder? Okay.
Yeah, those were called the cynocephali. That means dog head in Latin, I think, doesn't it? Or Greek or something.
Greek. Yeah,
Yeah.
Greek.
And in the past century, there have been tales of an upright walking wolf in Michigan, the Michigan Dogman. And then in the 90s, reporter Linda Godfrey started writing about another similar creature that was seen in Elkhart, Wisconsin. And since her book in 2003, Dogman sightings have just skyrocketed. And in some
Oh,
areas, they actually surpass Bigfoot sightings.
wow.
So, what's wrong with this picture? A Bigfoot like body with a dog or a wolf head and hind legs like a dog. And when I say that, compare a dog or a cat to a human. A lot of people would say that dogs have backward knees. They really don't. That's their heel sticking up in the air.
Okay.
So when you think about it, horses, cows, most animals, most quadrupeds, they have a back leg and even front legs too, that they walk on their tippy toes. And
Yeah.
that's way different than the way humans walk. We walk flat on the tarsal bones.
I think I'm okay with the dog head. I mean, like baboons kind
Yeah,
of have a dog-shaped head.
yeah.
And they're still primates if we're
Hmm.
if we're staying in that Bigfoot primate category. But I don't think dogs' legs would work well bipedally though, like how you just
Yeah.
described.
And that's my main problem with the flesh and blood dog man. We have prototypes for Bigfoot, like apes and gorillas. That's, something to base it on. But as far as we know, there are no earth animals except maybe birds that walk bipedally on their toes. And obviously, birds are light. And,
Mm.
we're not talking about the same thing when you've got a massive mammal, especially when it's running. So you've got a running, huge mammal on those backward facing knees, supposedly.
Well, and so the reports say that dogmen run.
Yeah, that's very common. Unlike Bigfoot, dogmen are never hardly sitting still. In fact, dogmen typically chase cars at very high speeds.
Well, I mean, they're dogs.
Yeah, that's a
Uh,
joke just waiting to be told.
I, but they run on two legs, so that's
Yeah.
the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, problematic. It sounds good on paper to think of that and to think of like a dog running on its hind legs, but no, quadruped hips and joints and leg bones just don't work that way. Not to mention when you're running 50 to 60 miles per hour to keep up with a car. And that would even be hard for a bipedal hip and leg, like in
Yeah.
birds or even humans. I think humans can run maximum ever was like 25 miles per hour. And
Whoa.
that's about the same as road runners. You know
The
how
re
his legs look like the little propeller when he starts running?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we know he's fast.
Um, the reports also say that dogmen can be aggressive.
Allegedly more so than Bigfoot. We have undocumented cases where people have been eaten or killed by dogmen, but
Oh,
they are predators. I mean, they're wolves, not primates. So I guess that would at least go along with the species.
well, the elephant in the room here, or how fast do elephants run?
Not 25 miles per hour, I don't think.
But I'm thinking fierce, wolf-like, bipedal. This is the Lon Chaney Jr. scenario. You've basically got a werewolf.
And as easy as it is to dive down this werewolf rabbit hole, and I don't know, would the rabbit get eaten? I guess so. Anyway, as superficially similar as Dogman is to Bigfoot, I think I have to vote no on a flesh and blood dogman. If you're seeing a dogman, you're looking at something paranormal.
But that's not to say people aren't seeing dogmen. Mm-mm.
No, but is it any different than a ghost? Which is
Right.
why we discuss this on a paranormal podcast. And as always, when we move into the paranormal, supernatural kind of realm, we drag out the Ephesians hypothesis. So the biblical worldview says genuine paranormal events are part of the spiritual warfare that we have going on. We don't create a new realm, though, of supernatural just because we expect a new twist on the paranormal some way.
Okay. Let's back up again first and look at the possible theories.
Yeah, we discussed Bigfoot as a real flesh and blood animal. That's our first idea. These creatures could be just that, a species of undocumented animal, probably a primate, some kind of ape relatives.
Yeah.
Or could they be more toward the human end of the spectrum? Those who hold to an evolutionary view would say that maybe Bigfoot was a missing link or just a close branch to people on the hominid family tree.
Like Neanderthals or Denisovans, would God create a sentient human relative?
That would seem to have a lot of theological issues, wouldn't it? But it's a theory some use to explain Bigfoot, especially since some reports say they have human like features. That was the lore of the old timers, like I said, when I was a kid.
Yeah. There are also some more conspiratorial explanations. What about a human hybrid?
That has been suggested. We know of modern experimentation with human animal hybrids, or chimeras, they're called, usually for the purpose of providing organs for human transplants. So,
Yikes.
could the government or some other group be producing genetically altered creatures, maybe part human, part ape?
I mean, it's really bizarre. And I don't know if it fits with the timeline of Bigfoot sightings
Yeah.
throughout history.
But not totally out of the question with modern technology, though.
Okay.
Actually, the University of Nevada, not long ago, among other places, have successfully combined stem cells from two totally different creatures. In this case, it was human and sheep cells, and they've actually made embryos that were part human and part sheep.
So would those grow into sentient hybrid beings, part human, part sheep?
Who knows? I mean,
Oh,
think of it.
wow.
Our technology is just way ahead of our wisdom in this type of research. We do things just because we can do them, I think, sometimes. But the fact is, we can produce creatures that have never existed before. We do it every day with smaller creatures like bacteria and plants. So, yes, we could do it.
I've heard some also weird similar theories that involve some ancient hybridization. Could Bigfoot be a Nephilim?
That's a big theory too among squatch chasing podcasters. So it goes back to that Genesis 6 account again. We've discussed it often. If this passage really is talking about human women mating with fallen sons of God or angels, we could call them, could their offspring, and these were called the Nephilim, could this have been a breeding program that's still going on today? Either the Nephilim are still breeding with humans or with each other to produce weird humanish looking, I guess, half human, half demon hybrids.
This is very strange. An interesting idea would be a great comic book, but very strange.
Yeah, yeah. And related to that, could Bigfoot be the cursed descendants of Cain? There are
Mm.
some people who think that that's the way God marked Cain and his descendants was by making him hairy and big.
That kind
So
of runs into the paranormal, doesn't it?
it has to, I think. And we could go full scale paranormal. There's a growing group of people who think Bigfoot creatures could be extraterrestrials or intraterrestrials. Are they coming from some dimension that's here with us all the time? Or are they coming from underground here on Earth through some
So
kind of portal?
there definitely is no lack of creativity in the Bigfoot world.
No, a lot of good creative people out there. And you said it well. Bigfoot enthusiasts, like we said, are a huge subculture right now. I know some of these people, and they are serious about their conventions, and they have research groups and high tech search equipment. I even know families who take Bigfoot hunting vacations now.
I mean, it's just fun, the search of the unknown.
Hmm.
But there's also a gazillion streaming shows about finding Bigfoot.
Or more like not finding
Yeah, I was
Bigfoot
gonna say
on that
that.
show. But the thing is, like other ideas that push into the paranormal, Bigfoot theories are changing worldviews. And that's why we discuss these alleged creatures.
And like you said, with Bigfoot, it may be a bit different. If the creatures really are flesh and blood animals, that's less of an issue than making them out to be paranormal.
Yeah, but when you go with the paranormal explanations, it's the same as ghosts and the other apparitions that we've discussed. The
Mhm.
basic axiom for this podcast, if something does push into the paranormal or supernatural, the biblical worldview has only one supernatural reality. So we have to stick with that one, the one reality that scripture describes to us.
Particularly the Ephesians 6. We're in a spiritual battle with fallen demonic entities bent on deceiving us in any way
Yeah,
possible.
that's right. And just as with ghosts, ETs, and all the rest that we talk about, we see the result of this in some Bigfoot beliefs. If Bigfoot phenomena force some into a paranormal explanation, that kind of sets them up for a false view of reality, I think. And it typically denies or obscures the biblical worldview, at least in some way.
If alternative views of the supernatural exist, then can we really trust what scripture reveals about the unseen realm?
Exactly. It's a problem. And with the growing number of people with supernatural beliefs about Bigfoot, we get significant changes, I think, in our cultural view of reality.
A very important idea. We'll probably be visiting this topic often as the cultural zeitgeist changes. Thank you for joining us in this episode. If you would like to comment or ask questions, please send us an email at godintheparanormal@gmail.com. You can also get much more information at our website, thinkingaboutthebible.com, where you'll find 2 books that you might consider giving someone struggling with beliefs about the paranormal. One of the books is the Ephesians Hypothesis, which lays out what the Bible says about the unseen realm. The other book is God and the Paranormal. It is a more detailed version of the paranormal from a biblical perspective. If you found this podcast useful or interesting, we really depend on you subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing it with others. You can find us on most major podcast platforms. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye for now.